we live in an extremely unequal country, and there are a lot of people who cannot afford to pay the expensive fees of private schools. And unfortunately, in India, they say na कि आपका भाग्य आपके हाथ की लकीरों पे लिखा होता है. It's almost true actually, because the future of a child gets decided at the age of 3 when they actually enter school. Every child, irrespective of the background they come from, irrespective of their parents' ability to pay, need to be able to access high quality education. Aadmi party was very much like very much like a startup, right, where everyone does everything. So while I probably went there to do policy research, ended up working on everything like making the manifesto, working with the media team, working with the campaign team, and but even then I don't think I saw it as something that I would do on a long-term basis. Except 6 months become a year, and a year has now almost become a decade. And I think that my shift to electoral politics, I have the central government to thank for that. I was working as an advisor, I was working in an honorary capacity, taking 1 rupee per month as salary. And the central government thought it fit to remove me from that post. And that is really when my journey into electoral politics actually started.
She is credited with bringing education revolution in the National Capital Region. On Table Talk this week, join Aadmi Party's leader Atishi as she speaks to me about her personal journey about reforming government schooling and the challenges ahead with the gender and digital disparity that COVID has exposed.
So I've already introduced you. You actually don't even need any introduction, but Atishi is a name that is synonymous with education reforms, not just in Delhi, but in the country. It's an issue that is really close to my heart as well. Education, lots needs to be done, a lot is being done, Atishi. As we speak about women in politics, and your base has, of course, been education. So I have a question. Your parents, I believe, were both professors. Did that somehow, whether you understood it, whether you internalized it or not, was that something that was behind you when you took up this issue of reforming education?
So I think, Jyotsna, the fact that I came from a family where my parents used to teach, where I went to extremely good schools, good universities, also made me realize that that is one of the reasons behind the fact why I have been able to succeed and reach where I have. But I also realized that not everyone gets that opportunity. And I went to a private school, a well-known private school in Delhi. Then I went to, studied in Delhi University, studied at St. Stephen's College. But there are many, many young people who do not get those opportunities. Why? Because we live in an extremely unequal country. And there are a lot of people who cannot afford to pay the expensive fees of private schools. And unfortunately, in India, they say na कि आपका भाग्य आपके हाथ की लकीरों पे लिखा होता है. It's almost true actually, because the future of a child gets decided at the age of 3 when they actually enter school. So if your parents have the money to pay the fees of expensive private schools, then you're going to have a good education, likely to go into a good university, and thereafter get a good job where you'll get a high paying, you'll get a good sort of a check with lots of zeros at the end of the month.
Yes.
But if, for example, your parents do not have the money to send you to a private school, then what happens? Then what happens is that आप एक government school में जाते हैं. There is a good chance that data shows that there's a 50% chance that you're likely to drop out even before you complete your education. And even if you do complete your education, because the quality of education has been poor, you end up getting very low-end jobs. You might be आप किसी की दुकान में काम कर रहे हो. You might end up working as a mechanic in a car repair shop. The problem is not working in a shop or being a mechanic. The problem is when you have no choice. When you have to make those career choices, those life choices, not because that is the career you want to pursue, but because you had no other choice. And I think that is really something that needs to change. That is really something that every child, irrespective of the background they come from, irrespective of their parents' ability to pay, need to be able to access high quality education.
And that disparity that you speak about, COVID mein to, I think we've all seen it has just, been enhanced. And I'm going to come to that in a little while. But that jump into politics, Atishi, from the kind of education that you had into the grind of Indian politics, what motivated you to get there? Is that about just changing the system? And how was the leap initially?
Well, the interesting thing is that I guess I didn't even realize when I made that leap, because I started my journey as a volunteer with India Against Corruption. And it was not even a political party at that point of time. And I was definitely not thinking of it as a long-term career option. I had been working for many years in the social sector. I had worked in think tanks, worked as policy consultant. I had spent several years working in rural India, seeing how change can be built there. And I think over the years, one began to see that unless large-scale change happens, things don't really move on the ground. This was the time when the India Against Corruption movement started. And for anyone interested in social change, it was definitely something that caught your attention, because thousands and thousands of people all across the country stepped out of their homes. And so I also started, I was one of those who volunteered with India Against Corruption, and did not think that at that point of time, we had no idea that India Against Corruption is going to become a political party. So from being volunteers of India Against Corruption, I ended up being a volunteer of Aadmi Party. And Aadmi Party was very much like very much like a startup, right? Where everyone does everything. So while I probably went there to do policy research, ended up working on everything, like making the manifesto, working with the media team, working with the campaign team. And but even then, I don't think I saw it as something that I would do on a long-term basis. Except 6 months become a year, and a year has now almost become a decade. But the interesting thing is that for many years, from 2015 onwards, I worked as an advisor to the Deputy Chief Minister. And I was working on education. And I think that my shift to electoral politics, I have the central government to thank for that. I was working as an advisor. I was working in an honorary capacity, taking 1 rupee per month as salary. And the central government thought it fit to remove me from that post. And that is really when my journey into electoral politics actually started. Maybe if they hadn't done that, I might still have been working as a policy
So what
advisor.
they say about, everything happens for a reason, I guess it kind of fits in for you, right? I want to know कि आपका पहला दिन जब आप पहले गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में गए, what was your first impression?
Actually, बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग बात है जो मैं अभी हम एक इनइक्वालिटी की बात कर रहे थे. I have lived in Delhi all of my life. लेकिन मैं पहली बार दिल्ली के सरकारी स्कूल में तब गई जब आम आदमी पार्टी ने दिल्ली में सरकार बनाई. तो जो बच्चे, जो यंग लोग प्राइवेट स्कूलों में पढ़ते हैं, अच्छी यूनिवर्सिटीज में जाते हैं, उन्होंने सरकारी स्कूल की दीवार के अंदर देखा भी नहीं होगा कभी. एंड आई वाज आल्सो लाइक दैट. द फर्स्ट थिंग दैट यू नोटिस इज कि आपको टॉयलेट की बदबू आती है. आप द टॉयलेट व्हिच इज 50 meters अवे फ्रॉम द गेट ऑफ द स्कूल, गेट तक उसकी स्मेल आ रही होती थी. टॉयलेट के दरवाजे टूटे हुए होते थे, वहां पे पानी नहीं होता था. उस टॉयलेट के बाहर, जिसकी स्मेल इतनी दूर तक आती है क्योंकि क्लासरूम्स की शॉर्टेज होती थी, उसके बाहर कॉरिडोर में बच्चे बैठ के पढ़ रहे होते थे, वहां पे क्लास चल रही होती थी. आप क्लासरूम के अंदर जाइए, वहां पे टेबल नहीं होती थी, चेयर नहीं होती थी, खिड़कियां टूटी होती थी, पंखे टूटे हुए होते थे, ब्लैक बोर्ड टूटे हुए होते थे, बच्चे दरियों पे बैठे होते थे और आप उन दरिये के ढेर को उठाइए तो उसमें से हजारों मच्छर निकल के आते थे. ये होते थे दिल्ली के सरकारी स्कूल. एंड पढ़ाई तो फिर बहुत दूर की बात है. इफ यू कुड नॉट प्रोवाइड ड्रिंकिंग वाटर, अगर आप टेबल नहीं दे सकते, चेयर नहीं दे सकते, पंखा नहीं दे सकते, आप पढ़ाई कहाँ पे देंगे बच्चों को. दूसरा, जब स्कूल का इतना बुरा हाल था और सरकार उसे ठीक नहीं करती थी, तो वो टीचर्स को भी एक मैसेज देता था. वो क्या मैसेज देता था कि भाई सरकार को इन बच्चों की चिंता नहीं है, ये बच्चे तो ऐसे ही सेकेंड क्लास सिटीजन हैं. और सब लोग ये कहते भी थे कि ये बच्चे पढ़ने थोड़ी आते हैं, ये बच्चे तो सिर्फ मिड डे मील का खाना खाने आते हैं, ये बच्चे तो सिर्फ स्कॉलरशिप का पैसा लेने के लिए आते हैं. और यही एक माहौल पूरे सरकारी स्कूल का होता था कि भाई ये बच्चे. इनफैक्ट हमारे पास एक वीडियो है काफी 2015 के समय का. हम स्कूल्स में जाते थे तो बच्चों से बात करते थे. एंड इट्स अ हार्ट ब्रेकिंग वीडियो. यू हियर दिस चाइल्ड सेइंग कि लोग कहते हैं हम देश का भविष्य हैं, हम देश का भविष्य हैं. हम थोड़ी हैं देश का भविष्य, हम तो सरकारी स्कूल में पढ़ते हैं. देश का भविष्य तो प्राइवेट स्कूल में पढ़ने वाले बच्चे हैं.
अच्छा, टूटी पड़ी पानी टपकता, हम कैसे पढ़ पाएंगे. बुरी बात आती है, हमारे स्कूल के टॉयलेट में से सामने से निकला भी नहीं जाता. देश का भविष्य हम थोड़ी है जो प्राइवेट स्कूल में पढ़ते हैं, वो है हम तो सरकारी स्कूल में पढ़ते हैं.
तो जब वो बच्चे अपने टूटे फूटे स्कूल देखते थे तो उनको लगता था कि भाई हम तो सेकंड क्लास सिटीजन हैं, आगे तो वो बच्चे जाएंगे जो उन चमकते हुए प्राइवेट स्कूल्स में पढ़ते हैं. And that is really what we were looking to change.
And you have succeeded in not just changing that aspect, but also changing the image of government schools in the capital with the kind of amenities, the kind of new stuff that you have introduced into it. And I'm going to also bring that up. But what is the one big challenge जो आपको सबसे ज्यादा लगा in this reform?
आई थिंक सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज था कि जो सारे स्टेक होल्डर्स हैं, चाहे वो पेरेंट्स हैं, टीचर्स हैं, प्रिंसिपल्स हैं, बच्चे हैं, उन सबको कन्विंस करना कि चेंज एक्चुअली हो सकता है. वरना कहीं ना कहीं सब ये मान के बैठे थे कि ऐसा ही तो होता है. जब हम शुरू में व्हेन वी यूज्ड टू गो विद अ लॉट ऑफ पॉलिसी सजेशंस, रिफॉर्म्स, तो दो टाइप्स ऑफ रिस्पॉन्स मिलते थे. एक तो हमें डिफरेंट लेवल के ऑफिसर्स वगैरह कहते थे जी ये तो हो ही नहीं सकता, ये तो पॉसिबल ही नहीं है. एंड नहीं तो कहते थे जी ये तो हम कर ही रहे हैं. सो बिटवीन जो हम कर रहे हैं और जो हो नहीं सकता, नो चेंज वाज पॉसिबल. एंड मेकिंग पीपल बिलीव दैट चेंज इज पॉसिबल, making people believe that government schools could be better than private schools, making people believe that children who come from do not come from that background of privilege can do as well or better. I think ये सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज था. और सिस्टम भी बहुत बड़ा था. हालांकि ऑफ कोर्स दिल्ली और स्टेट से छोटा है, लेकिन फिर भी आपके 1000 स्कूल, 60,000 टीचर, 16 लाख बच्चे और एक सिस्टम जो 20-40 साल से चला आ रहा है उस तरीके से. सो ब्रिंगिंग चेंज इन सच अ बिग सिस्टम वाज आल्सो अ चैलेंज. ट्राइंग टू मूव ऑल ऑफ दीज स्टेक होल्डर्स टुगेदर, इन सबको साथ लेके चलना, चाहे बच्चों का कॉन्फिडेंस बनाना है, चाहे टीचर्स के साथ डायलॉग में रहना है, या पेरेंट्स की कॉन्फिडेंस बिल्डिंग करनी है. ये पूरा जो प्रोसेस था, that was definitely a challenge.
So when you sat down on the table, it's like you're taking out a charter, काम करने से पहले you're making your points. What was that one thing then you said? How are you going to start? What was the starting point for this change then?
I think the starting point for this change was dialogue with all the stakeholders. और जब शुरू में सरकार बनी तो चीफ मिनिस्टर मिस्टर अरविंद केजरीवाल एंड डेप्यूटी चीफ मिनिस्टर एंड एजुकेशन मिनिस्टर मिस्टर मनीष सिसोदिया, उन्होंने एक बहुत बड़ी मीटिंग करी सारे प्रिंसिपल्स के साथ और उनको कहा कि जी हम चेंज लाना चाहते हैं. आप में से कौन कौन ऐसे चेंज में शामिल होना चाहता है? आप हमें बताइए कि if there are any principals from amongst you who want to bring about a change in your schools, you give us a proposal, right? And हम सबसे पहले चेंजेस को आपके स्कूल्स में पायलट करेंगे आपके ब्लूप्रिंट के हिसाब से. And there are 1,000 schools. About 200 of those 1,000 principals submitted their plans and their proposals, out of which 54 we selected as people who had given thought. और उन 54 schools के साथ हमने शुरुआत करी. And उन 54 schools में पहले हमने अलग अलग चेंजेस पहले पायलट किए. दूसरा हमने अलग अलग स्टेक होल्डर से बात करी. जैसे हमने प्रिंसिपल्स, तो ये तो था कि 1000 प्रिंसिपल्स के साथ बात करना. फिर कभी कभी हम एक टीचर्स के छोटे ग्रुप्स के साथ बैठ के लेट नाइट तक बात करते थे, कभी प्रिंसिपल्स के साथ बैठ के बात करते थे. तो प्रिंसिपल्स ने हमें कहा कि देखिए हम बच्चों की पढ़ाई पे कैसे ध्यान देंगे, हम दिन भर तो पंखे रिपेयर करा रहे हैं, लाइटें ठीक करवा रहे हैं, टोटी ठीक करवा रहे हैं. तो जब तक कोई और इसको देखने वाला नहीं होगा, हाउ आर वी एवर गोइंग टू पे अटेंशन टू एकेडमिक्स. और वहां से एक स्टेट मैनेजर का आइडिया निकल के आया कि हर स्कूल को हमने एक स्टेट मैनेजर दिया, whose responsibility it was to look after all repair, maintenance, infrastructure, or then principals could actually focus on academics. And second, फिर एक बारी टीचर्स ने एक इंटरेस्टिंग बात कही. हम टीचर्स ट्रेनिंग वगैरह की बात करते थे और टीचर्स ने कहा कि जी आप हमें ट्रेन करने की बात करते हैं, लेकिन ट्रेनिंग में आज तक तो हमें कभी इज्जत से ट्रीट नहीं किया गया. हमें टूटी हुई बेंच पे बिठाते हैं, हमें ठीक से खाना भी नहीं देते, हमें 25 रुपए पकड़ा देते हैं कैश में कि जी आप अपना दिन का खाना खा लो. कहते हमारी भी कोई डिग्निटी है. एंड वी रियलाइज्ड व्हेन वी वेंट इनटू द बॉटम ऑफ द टीचर ट्रेनिंग, वी रियलाइज्ड दैट just because there was a norm that was fixed by the central government for 100 rupees per teacher per day, that was not enough to provide high quality training. तो फिर अगर आप 100 रुपए पर टीचर पर डे ही आपको खर्च करना है, फिर आपको उस टूटे फूटे क्लासरूम में ही ट्रेनिंग करनी है, फिर आपके पास टीचर को दिन में 2 बारी चाय देने के, 1 बारी लंच देने के भी उस 100 रुपए में पैसे नहीं आते. तो जब तक सिस्टम टीचर्स से, बच्चों से, पेरेंट्स से बात नहीं करता है, तब तक चेंजेस क्या करने हैं वो समझ में नहीं आता.
Maybe the quality of teachers. Yeah. That needs a whole different ball game, isn't it? कहाँ से शुरू करो, कहाँ से change लाओ with teachers, and it's not their fault, as you said. You know, some of them their pay is so poor, that their training lacks, but the fact remains that they are not adequately trained इन बच्चों को पढ़ाने के लिए.
Interestingly, ये actually एक myth है. ये इसलिए मिथ है कि टीचर्स गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में क्वालिफाइड नहीं है. एक्चुअली टीचर्स ज्यादातर गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स में आर बेटर क्वालिफाइड एंड बेटर पेड देन टीचर्स इन मोस्ट प्राइवेट स्कूल्स. व्हाई? बिकॉज सरकारी स्कूल में अगर आप एक टीचर हैं तो यू आर यूजुअली सिलेक्टेड बाय क्वाइट अ रिगरस सिलेक्शन प्रोसेस. मतलब एक एंट्रेंस एग्जाम होता है, एक मिनिमम कट ऑफ मार्क्स होते हैं, एंड टीचर्स इन गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स एक्चुअली हैव बेटर सैलरीज देन प्राइवेट स्कूल्स. A गवर्नमेंट स्कूल प्रिंसिपल, एक सेकेंडरी स्कूल के प्रिंसिपल की तनख्वाह 1 लाख रुपए है. आपको कौन से प्राइवेट स्कूल में इतनी सैलरी मिलती है? मतलब 10, 12, 15 प्राइवेट स्कूल आप छोड़ दीजिए. A teacher who teaches class 11 and 12 gets a salary of 80,000 rupees. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि टीचर्स क्वालिफाइड नहीं है, ऐसा नहीं है कि टीचर्स वेल पेड नहीं है. प्रॉब्लम ये है कि मोटिवेटेड नहीं है. और एक बिलीफ है कि जी सरकारी स्कूल में तो कुछ होना नहीं है. एंड हमें अक्सर टीचर्स हमें बताते हैं कि जब वो शुरू में पढ़ाने आए थे, कहते हैं हम शुरू में तो बहुत एंथुजियाज्म से काम शुरू करते हैं और हमें लगता है कि हम कुछ चेंज लेके आएंगे, बट कहते हैं कि वी रीच आवर स्टाफ रूम्स एंड देयर आर दीस टीचर्स हु हैव बीन देयर फॉर 30-40 इयर्स, जो हमारा मजाक उड़ाते हैं. कहते हैं अच्छा अभी नए आए हो तभी तुम्हारे में इतना जोश है, तुम भी कुछ दिनों में सेटल हो जाओगे. एंड बट आई थिंक देयर आर अ लॉट ऑफ फैंटास्टिक टीचर्स इन द सिस्टम. एंड आपको टीचर्स के काम को रिकॉग्नाइज करने की जरूरत है. अभी टीचर को क्या लगता है? अभी उसे लगता है कि देखिए कि मैंने चाहे आज की स्थिति में गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स में या किसी भी गवर्नमेंट जॉब में क्या होता है, टीचर को लगता है कि भाई मैं स्कूल जाऊं या ना जाऊं, पढ़ाऊं या ना पढ़ाऊं, अच्छा पढ़ाऊं या बुरा पढ़ाऊं, मुझे तो 1 तारीख को सैलरी मिलनी है. मैं मेहनत करता हूं तब भी मुझे सैलरी मिलती है, मैं क्लास में नहीं भी जाता हूं फिर भी मुझे सैलरी मिलती है. So there is no incentive that a teacher has for actually performing well. What did our government do? We started recognizing high quality teachers and good teachers. उसका मैं आपको एक एग्जांपल देती हूँ कि जो हमारा टीचर्स डे का प्रोग्राम होता है, कि एक टीचर्स डे पे एक अवार्ड्स फंक्शन होता है. The Teachers Day Awards function is the most glamorous program of the Delhi government, and it is designed like the Oscar Awards. एंड आप उस प्रोग्राम में घुसिए, उसमें पूरा एक रेड कारपेट बिछा हुआ होता है, वहां पे सेल्फी पॉइंट्स होते हैं टीचर्स के लिए. जब टीचर को अवार्ड मिलता है तो एस्कॉर्ट्स आके उन्हें स्टेज पे लेके जाते हैं, उनको स्टेज से उतार के ले जाते हैं. यू हैव वेल नोन बैंड्स कमिंग इन टू परफॉर्म फ्रॉम ऑल ओवर द कंट्री. एंड जब टीचर्स डे के अवार्ड्स होते हैं तो हर साल टीचर्स डे से पहले आप अक्सर देखते हैं कि गवर्नमेंट्स अपने आप को एडवर्टाइज करते हैं. हम टीचर्स डे के समय पूरी दिल्ली में इन अवार्ड विनिंग टीचर्स की फोटोग्राफ्स लगाते हैं अक्रॉस ऑल होर्डिंग्स, बिलबोर्ड्स, इन मेट्रोज एंड ऑल दैट, टू ऑनर द टीचर्स हु आर रियली बिल्डिंग आवर फ्यूचर. एंड आई थिंक दैट टीचर्स बेसिकली इस रिकग्निशन को सीख कर रहे हैं. वो चाहते हैं कि अगर मैं मेहनत करता हूँ, मैं अच्छा पढ़ाता हूँ, कोई मेरे काम को रिकग्नाइज करे. वो ये नहीं कह रहे हैं कि भाई आप मुझे पैसे दो या जो नहीं पढ़ा रहा है उसको पनिशमेंट दो, पर वो ये कह रहे हैं कि भाई जो मैं मेहनत कर रही हूँ कोई उसे पहचाने तो सही. एंड आई थिंक इट इज दिस रिकग्निशन दैट हैज मेड अ लॉट ऑफ डिफरेंस.
Fair enough. I think it was long overdue. It is long overdue, I think, for the fraternity as a whole in the country, Atishi, about the necessity to bring in sex education. How is that panning out for government schools? Because it is more and more a necessity for the generation per se.
So no, definitely, I think that it is not just sex education, but I feel that in terms of overall understanding the kind of inequalities that exist in our society, the kind of gender-related inequities and prejudice that exist in society, I think that इस सबको टैकल करने की जरूरत है. एंड दैट इज समथिंग दैट वी हैव बीन वर्किंग ऑन, बोथ इन टर्म्स ऑफ जेंडर सेंसिटाइजेशन, both in terms of actually making children aware of issues related to child sexual abuse, of reporting any such issues that come up, एंड मुझे लगता है कि इसमें सबसे जरूरी चीज है टू मेक कॉन्वर्सेशंस लाइक दिस नॉर्मल, कि ऐसी कोई interestingly we have recently started school clinics on the line of mohalla clinics in Delhi government schools, and we actually have not just doctors who look after the physical health of students. We actually in each mohalla clinic have psychologists and counselors who are there for the mental health of students. So the intention is that a lot of these conversations need to be normalized, कि किसी को ये नहीं लगना चाहिए कि any of these are taboo issues, कि अगर if I am facing questions, challenges, even if there's any issue of abuse, so there is no one that I can talk to.
I'm glad you already you brought up that disparity. कभी ऐसे मौके थे जब you had to speak to families. The school still have to speak to families कि लड़कियों को स्कूल भेज दो. Or is that changing?
Fortunately not. I think that is something that has changed. I think that almost all girls across the country, definitely in Delhi, are going to school. But I do think that जो government schools में change आया है, उसका सबसे ज़्यादा फायदा I think कि लड़कियों को हुआ है. And इसलिए हुआ है because when families have limited disposable income and when government schools were in a bad shape, and तो क्या करते थे कि अगर उनके पास एक बच्चे के प्राइवेट स्कूल की फीस देने के पैसे होते हैं तो अपने बेटे को प्राइवेट स्कूल में भेजते हैं. एंड आई रिमेम्बर मेनी इयर्स अगो नाउ, in the early days when we started working, I went into speaking to some girls in the assembly of a girls' school, and I asked them कि आप में से कितने लोगों के भाई प्राइवेट स्कूल में पढ़ते हैं. And you would not believe it, 90% of the girls raised their hands. So that means their families were spending money on the education of their sons, thinking that भाई बेटे को तो कम से कम अच्छी पढ़ाई दे दो, क्योंकि सबको पता है कि सरकारी स्कूल में तो पढ़ाई होती नहीं है. And the fact that now government schools provide high quality education, I feel that the greatest impact it has had is on the girls who are studying in these schools.
यही प्रॉब्लम आतिशी ड्यूरिंग कोविड पिछले 2 साल में, when we've had digital disparity, we've also seen again financial issues, families who've lost incomes. They have chosen कि लड़का पढ़ता रहे, एक गैजेट है घर में तो वो लड़के के पास ही रहे. अगर एक बच्चा पढ़ सकता है तो वो लड़का ही होगा. Has that pushed you back a little bit?
So definitely, I think COVID has pushed us back. I think that COVID has pushed, I don't think that disparity is just there on gender lines. I think that disparity is also there in terms of class. I think that the number of children, Delhi जैसे शहर में भी सिर्फ 60% students have device access. One device per student is there, not even in 25% of households. And so what has happened is कि पिछले, और अगर दिल्ली में ये हाल है, one can imagine कि पूरे बाकी देश में क्या हाल रहा है, right? That if in Delhi only 60% students have devices and internet connections, and one can imagine that that number would go down to 20, 25, 30% maybe in the rest of the country. So what it has meant is कि जो बहुत सारे गेन्स हमारे एजुकेशन सिस्टम में पिछले 20-30 साल में हुए हैं, जैसे अभी आपने कहा कि अभी भी कहना पड़ता है कि बेटियों को स्कूल भेजो, नहीं कहना पड़ता. आज हर बच्चा स्कूल आता है. लेकिन the gains that have been made in the last 20-30 years of access, I think पिछले 2 साल में उसमें बहुत बड़ा लॉस हुआ है. Because बहुत सारे बच्चों का एक्सेस छूट गया एजुकेशन को, और अभी भी जब बच्चे वापस आए हैं, so in fact we are struggling with the issue कि अभी 1-2 महीने तक कैसे उनको बेसिक्स फिर से सिखाना, कैसे इस गैप को ब्रिज करना, कैसे फाउंडेशन स्किल्स पे फोकस करना. तो definitely there has been a setback.
It's unfortunate, but I think also to bring children back to school. It's not just the education; it is to bring them back. Was it easy? I mean, there is this whole thing: school जाना है, नहीं जाना है, school बंद हो सकता है, cases हैं, नहीं है. The uncertainty of education, in a sense, over the last 2 years, that's also a challenge, isn't it?
Interestingly, I think that we have seen in government schools that children are very keen to come back to schools. I don't think there has been any question in their mind. और जब से government schools में optional भी हुआ है कि आप आ सकते हैं, we have had 85% plus attendance. So I don't think there is And the thing is that I think that is also very much, as I said, a class divide, because जो बच्चे government schools में पढ़ते हैं, उसमें in their homes they actually don't have that kind of space. Forget devices. When you have a full family living in one room, then how is a child going to access education when there are going to be 2-3 people in that house? Children don't even have access to open spaces, to playgrounds, and therefore school band hone se they've had not just academic loss, but also a lot of social and psychological loss, I think.
At the time I went to when I went to school here, it was all about learning by rote. An education that did not allow us to think. So I think it's the change that's absolutely needed. Sit them down and let them think, because I mean the world is changing. So 10 years down the line, Atishi, what has the journey been like?
Oh, I think it's been a challenging but extremely rewarding and fulfilling journey. I think that I see a lot of my friends who are now, हम साथ में college में पढ़े, school में पढ़े, college में पढ़े, many of them are now leaving their high-paying jobs and looking for something more meaningful to do. There's midlife crisis that one all talks about. And I think if I was to look at my own journey, I think that yes, politics is difficult, it is challenging, it is all-consuming. But the kind of impact that we are able to have is absolutely amazing and extremely fulfilling.
That one loss to Gautam Gambhir in the elections, how demoralizing was it? Or wasn't it?
No, so it is definitely difficult. I had spent 1 year on that election, on the campaign trail. And so it definitely was difficult. And of course, loss and defeat is difficult. But it's interesting because on the very day that the election results came out, in fact, even before that, even while the counting was still going on, after the initial rounds, the trend was very clear. And I left the counting center. I was at Mr. Kejriwal's residence, and there were many of us who were sitting there watching the results. And of course, I was depressed. And he said to me that day itself, कि अच्छा आतिशी, अब assembly elections की तैयारी करनी है. And so I think that you have to have the courage to move on, and I think also definitely the encouragement from those around you, and I think that is what takes you forward.
So how do you handle it? Because I mean that's something that, especially for women, women across the board who are trying to do something, it's the first thing that they encounter today.
See, but the fact is that the world is an unequal and unfair place. I think that is something that we all know and we all realize. And I think that if everything was hunky-dory, then people like me would not need to be in politics. I'd have a much more comfortable life, probably a higher salary and many more hours of sleep. The fact that I am in politics is because this is exactly what we want to change.
And that is, I think, a good way to end this conversation. Atishi, thank you so much. It was lovely. I could have carried on asking you many more questions. There's lots of work to do, I know, and hoping to see a lot of change in Punjab as well with the education system, with the remarkable work that you've done in Delhi. And more power to you, and hope to have you back someday again and carry on this conversation. But I'm going to let you go. We've gone over. Thanks so much for today, Atishi.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.